Welcome back to another video. This is Dr. Tarsia Hubert speaking, and I am going to be talking about symbolic statements with parentheses in this video. Alrighty, so let's jump right in and let's just recall some of the statements, statements of symbolic logic that we have already discussed in a prior video or a previous video. And the first one is negation. So negation, remember that the symbol for negation is this little squiggly line right here. And that means not P. Or you can also say it is not true that P. That's the common English translation for it. Then we talked about the conjunction, which is when you connect two statements with the word and we use this upside down V to represent that statement. And this is P and Q. And we didn't talk about this, but you can also translate P but Q to mean the same thing as P and Q. Then we discussed the disjunction, which is P or Q in the English translation, and we use the V-looking symbol to represent the disjunction. The conditional statement is the if-then statement, and we use the one directional arrow to represent if-then. This reads, if P then Q. You can also translate P is sufficient for Q to mean the same thing, or you can also translate Q is necessary for P to represent the same thing. And then lastly, we've talked about the biconditional, which we use the double directional arrow to represent the biconditional, and that means if and only if. So P, if and only if Q is what we mainly talked about, but you can also use P is necessary and sufficient for Q to also translate into this P double arrow Q. So these are all of the different logic statements that we have talked about so far. And in this particular video, we're going to look at statements, those same logic statements, but this time with parentheses. So that means we're going to be doing more than one of those operations in one particular statement. Now, the key thing is the placement of the parentheses in the symbolic form. That's really, really important. The placement of the parentheses, and then in the written form, the placement of the commas are really, really important. Okay, and we're going to go through and talk a little bit more about all of that. So here's an example. Let's let P and Q represent the following statements. P is I am healthy. Q is I am wealthy. I know you might be thinking, I am healthy, I am wealthy, right? So those are my two statements. We want to write each of these following statements that's about to come in symbolic statements, okay? We want to write each of the statements that's about to come, the symbolic statements, in words. So we're going from symbols to words. So the first one reads, so that little squiggly line is the negation. That reads not. And then the upside down V is the and. So this reads not P and Q. Well, since the P and Q is in parentheses, that means I'm negating the P and the Q. I'm not just negating the P. So again, the placement of the parentheses is really, really important. So since P is I'm healthy and Q is I'm wealthy, then the negation of that would be it is not true that I am healthy and wealthy. Okay, so this is how that statement in symbolic form would translate to words. Now, we could also say this another way. You can also say it is not true that I am both healthy and wealthy. That's letting you know that that negation applies to both the P statement and the Q statement. Okay, here's the second one. This reads not P and Q. This time, since there are no parentheses, the negation only applies to the P. So this is only not P and Q. So this would translate into I am not healthy and I am wealthy. So I'm not healthy, but I am wealthy. Okay, and then you hear me say that but. That's what I was saying earlier. You can also translate the but to be the same thing as an and. And then for the last one for this example, this reads not P or Q. And since the P or Q is in parentheses, again, that means that negation is applying to both of those. So you would say it is not true that I am healthy or wealthy. So it is not true that I am healthy or wealthy. Another way to say that is I am neither healthy nor wealthy. So it's saying that negation applies to both of those. Okay, so this is how you would take the symbols and translate them into words. Here's another example. Let P, Q, and R represent the following simple statements. P, a student misses lecture. Q, a student studies. R, a student fails. We want to write each of the following symbolic statements in words. Okay, so here come the statements. This one reads Q and not P implies not R. So remember I told you that the if-then statement can also be read as implies. So that's an if-then statement right here. So this is Q and not P implies not R. So if a student studies and does not miss lecture, then a student will not fail. Okay, so if a student studies, because that's, if a student studies, that's Q, and this symbol here is and, not P, which means a student does not miss lecture, then, because this is an if then, you got to have the then, not R, a student does not fail. So then the student will not fail. That's how you would translate that into words, okay? Here's another one. This reads Q and not P implies not R. But these two are grouped together, okay? So whenever you have groups, that lets you know where the comma should be placed. So you see here we had Q and not P, and then the closed parentheses. So that's where if a student studies and does not miss lecture, that lets me know the comma goes there, then the student will not fail. All right. And since that one is an if then, you'll always have the a comma before the then as well. Now this one, since it's not an if then, it's really important that you pay attention to where the parentheses are to know where the comma goes. So Q is a student studies. This symbol is and. So you will say a student studies and, well now this is an if then statement. And so this is also a parenthesis. So you will have a comma next. Then you will say if not P. So if a student does not miss lecture, then not R, a student does not fail. Okay, so what does that look like? A student studies, Q, comma, and you put your comma, so your and is first, and then your parentheses, so you would normally put your comma here, but because in English, in the English language, you actually put your comma before the and. So a student studies, and if the student does not miss lecture, then the student will not fail. Hopefully I didn't confuse you. But that's how you would translate this statement here into words. If you have any questions, make sure you type them in the comments, or you can email me personally, and I'll try my best to explain or answer and return your email or reply to your comment. Okay, so now sometimes you have symbolic statements that don't have parentheses. And so whenever you have this situation, then the statements before and after the most dominant connective should be grouped together. Okay, well, which ones are the most dominant connective? So here's the order of dominance from least to most. So the least dominant is the negation statement. Then the conjunction and disjunction, the and or statements, those have the same level of dominance. Then the conditional statement has a stronger dominance. And then the one with the most dominance is the biconditional statement. Okay, so you'll take which one of those operations is the strongest, and you'll group either the statements after or the statements before together. So let me show you what that looks like. So for example, we have this statement here. This reads P implies Q and not R. The operation with the strongest dominance is the if-then statement. So the conditional. So you will group either the two before or the two after together. Well, there aren't two before, so there's nothing to group before, but there are two things after. So you will group the Q and not R together, okay? And that will be considered a conditional statement because the conditional is the most dominant. Let's look at another one. This reads P and Q implies not R. Remember, implies is an if-then statement. So the if-then is, again, the most dominant one in here, the most dominant operation. So I would group the two things before and the two things after, but there aren't two things after it, so I'll just group the two things before it. This will be considered a conditional statement because that is the most dominant operation here. Here's another one. This reads P if and only if Q implies R. The if and only if is the strongest dominant, has the strongest dominance. So I would group either the two before or the two after, or both if I have two before and after. So I only have two after. So I would group the Q and the R. Q implies R together. This will be considered a biconditional because the biconditional has the strongest dominance. This says, if P then Q, if and only if R, or P implies Q, if and only if R. The one with the strongest dominance is the if and only if statement. So I would group the two before. There aren't two afterwards, so there's nothing to group afterwards. So I would group the P implies Q, if and only if R. This is considered a biconditional because the biconditional has the strongest dominance in this particular statement. So again, we're just looking at each statement to see which one has the strongest dominance. All right, this one reads P and not Q implies R or S. The one with the strongest dominance is the if then, the biconditional, not the biconditional, the conditional. One way is conditional. So there are actually two before and there are two after that I can group. So I'll group both of those. Group the P and not Q together and group the R or S together. This will be considered a conditional because the conditional has the strongest dominance in this particular statement. And then the last example, this reads P and Q or R. Now remember the disjunction, or this is a conjunction. The conjunction and the disjunction have the same level of dominance. So in this particular case, we cannot group it because they have the same level of dominance, which means this one has an ambiguous meaning. So there's nothing we could do with that if it doesn't particularly give us commas to show us how to group it. Okay. So we're going to look at one last example to see how this will play out. So in example 3, we want to let P, Q, and R represent the following simple statements. P is I failed the course. Q is I study hard. R is I passed the final. And we want to write each statement below in symbolic form. So here's the first one. I do not fail the course if and only if I study hard and I pass the final. So I do not fail the course. I passed the course is R. So I failed the course is P. So I do not fail the course would be not P. If and only if is the double arrow, I study hard is Q, and it's the upside down V, and I pass the final is R. So if I write all that in words, it says not P, double arrow, Q, and R. Now, this one isn't grouped together for us. There are no commas that show us how to group that, but it has to be grouped a particular way. So we look to see which one has the strongest dominance, which is this biconditional, the double arrow. This has the strongest dominance. So I would group the two before, which there are not two before, or the two after, and the two after, which I do have two after, which is the Q and R. So you'll group the Q and R together, and that is what this statement would look like. All right, one last one. I do not fail the course if and only if I study hard, comma, and I pass the final. So the comma here lets me know how to group it. So because I have a comma, I actually know how to group it. So I do not fail the course, which would be not P. If and only if it's the double arrow, I study hard is Q. So I will group that together. And then, and it's the upside down V, I pass the final, which is R. So that would look like this. Not P, I do not fail the course. If and only if the double arrow, I study hard, which is Q. The comma means you group those together. And it's the upside down V, and R, I pass the final. Excuse me. So that is all I have for statements with parentheses. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I will see you in the next